Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we talk about making candles and other related products and running a candle business and other related businesses. If this is your first time here, my name is Wade. I'm the owner of Black Tie Barn. I run a candle business I have for about a dozen years now, and I also help in the educational space as well, helping other new candle makers, candle business owners. We also do supply distribution like fragrance oils and wicks and a few other things as well. So if you haven't checked out our website yet, definitely do that. It's blacktiebarn.com. Welcome to the channel. We'd love to have you around for future videos, so make sure you hit subscribe. Click that bell for notifications whenever we do post new content. Oh, and one other thing. We do have a newsletter below. Click that, sign up on that, or just go to the website and sign up there. I am trying to consolidate newsletters, so I know some of you said, I haven't been getting the new newsletters. Some of you have. I'm working through that, but I promise we'll get it all sorted out. But that is where we release new information about new videos, any news about the candle industry, product reviews, new fragrance oils, new wicks, whatever. So definitely sign up for that. And anyways, with that being said, today we are tackling a hot topic, and that is candle product label laws, as well as candle safety and the crucial role that labeling laws and requirements play in candle safety. But first, a quick shout out to onlinelabels.com for sponsoring today's video, as well as providing us with their new product, which is pre-made candle warning labels. But we'll mention this a little bit more a little later in the video. All right, so I know many of you already run a candle business. Maybe you're at the early stages of it, maybe you're further along, or maybe you're just considering starting one. That's why today's video is so important, because we're going to be breaking down candle label requirements, fire safety, standards in a way that's informative, straightforward, but hopefully make it a little easier to digest, right? So we want to make it easier to understand. Just because it's important doesn't mean it has to be dull, and doesn't mean it has to be overly complex. And after we discuss what needs to go on a candle label, we're going to talk about two important standards that apply to the candle industry. They are called ASTM standards. There's actually more than two. We're going to talk about the two most important ones, in my opinion, for today's video. So we're going to talk about labels first, and then we're going to get into ASTM, which talks about your warning labels and fire test, basically testing safety. And we'll get to that later on, but don't leave the video too early, because that's the second part of this video. We're going to start with what the heck even needs to go on a candle label. Now we're talking about the product label right now, and we'll talk about the safety warning label here in just a minute. Now you can read the labeling law requirements in entirety if you want on the FTC website, or on the National Candle Association website as well, I believe. I will also try to provide some links in the description below. However, let me summarize it for you in a nutshell and highlight some of those key points to keep in mind. In a nutshell, the candle labeling laws and standards in the US encompass a wide range of requirements and regulations overseen by various federal agencies. The two notable ones that apply to us are the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, which is the FPLA, and they are administered by the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC. Those are the ones that are creating these mandates for us that we are trying to adhere to, like candle display labels for product identity, net content, both in the imperial and metric units, manufacturer and distributor name, and the location of the business. So let's break each of those down, because those are the key points that we need to focus on. And we're going to start with, I think, the most confusing one for a lot of people, and that is product identity. Now, product identity is the location of the label information. The straightforward, strict rule is that the product identity must appear on the product display panel, or the PDP. That's fairly easy to understand, at least what that sentence means, right? So whatever your primary label is, your product identity needs to be established. However, the principal display panel is the confusing part for many. What exactly does that mean? Does that mean the main label on the product? That's what most of us think. But could that also mean the box that the product comes in? Many of you have probably seen candles that show up in product boxes, but when you take the product out, there's not much on it. Like luxury candles especially do not have labels typically on the candle. But the primary or principal display panel is the box in that case. And so there is sort of this nuance and gray area to this, and that's why it's a little bit confusing. You do have the right to present your candle label and product to the National Candle Association, and they can approve whether that actually meets the regulations or not. And so I think if you can make a justified case of what your your principal display panel is, in other words, what's the primary part that you're showing what your product identity is, and you can justify it, I think most of the time you're going to be fine. And that is why you see a lot of misinformation on Facebook groups and other YouTube videos talking about what needs to go on your specific product label. And maybe a clearer way to understand that is they also have the addition, the further clarification, and I'm going to read this word for word. The principal display panel is defined as that part of the label that is most likely to be displayed, presented, shown, or examined under normal and customary conditions of display for retail sale. That is the part that is, I think, overlooked. It doesn't necessarily mean that the way the candle looks like at home when it's sitting there burning. It's how the candle is purchased and sold for retail, which often would include, of course, your product box. So again, that's why you'll see many, many notable brands not have much on their actual candle itself, but they do on the product box that the candle is sold in. It's part of the product. And you might be wondering, what is product identity? We're talking, scented candle. What's the name of your product or anything else associated with it? That is the part that needs to be somewhere on the principal display panel, which again could be on your candle itself as the label, or it could be on the product box as well. I spent a little extra time on that because this is a tougher thing to understand for many. So on these next ones, it won't take near as long to get through. The next one is net content. This one does get some questions as well. Net content is what is required, which means the actual weight of the candle itself, the net weight, which means it does not include your jar. So if your jar normally weighs, let's say, 12 ounces, and then filled up, this candle weighs 20 ounces, well, then that is a net weight of 8 ounces, right? And then you have to convert ounces to grams. And because I took the liberty to go ahead and make that conversion before I started the video, I know that 8 ounces is roughly 227 grams. Again, for your net weight 8-ounce candle, on your label somewhere, you need to have net weight 8 ounces / 227 grams. But please do not list the total weight, and also do not list it by volume. All right, manufacturer and distribution information. So basically, the location of the business must be included somewhere on your product. And there are certain allowances where you do not have to list the full address. For example, if your address can be easily found other ways, like a website or a phone book or something like that, right? So there are exceptions, and you would want to dive in and look at what the specific exceptions are. Generically speaking, the manufacturer or distributor information, as far as the address goes, it should be listed somewhere on the product. Now, another thing to consider, which I said we're going to talk a little bit more in detail here in just a minute, is that there are ASTM standards and EU standards if you're outside of the US, and that's how candles should be labeled for fire safety according to those regulations, or those standards, I should say, not regulations. And it's also worth noting that these laws and regulations for label requirements do have some specifically listed for Canada, Mexico, and the EU, but they have their own unique requirements regarding language and content, and so it is different outside of the US. Most of the people here are in the US, so most of this video would apply to you. For those that live outside the US, you will have different regulations to follow. Okay, so that wraps up the basics of what's important when it comes to a product label, right? So your main product label, like sandalwood scented candle, net weight 8 ounces / 227 grams. That's really the gist of what you need. And of course, somewhere on the product, you need your manufacturer or distributor information, contact information. A lot of people also have that on their website, of course. You should anyways. That really is all that it boils down to. And I just wanted to spend some time on that because there is confusion about what needs to go on the product label versus the product box and so on. It's whatever your primary display is when it's sold for retail. In other words, is this information reasonable and easy to find if you look at the product on a shelf at a store? I think that kind of makes it a little easier to understand. Let's dive into the ASTM standards. I understand that for many of you, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Many of you also do know what I'm talking about, but you just don't know the details. First, what the heck is the ASTM? Well, the ASTM is one of the largest and voluntary standards development organizations in the world. They create technical standards for materials, products, systems, and services. The ASTM creates standards for all sorts of industries, not just candles. However, of course, for this video, we're going to be talking about ones that apply to candles. There are currently 6 ASTM standards that apply to candles. However, some apply to the production and the use of glass and materials and accessories and so on. We're not going to be talking about those. Today, we're going to focus on 2 of the standards specifically. The first is, and I'm going to have to look back at my notes here. The first is F2058-07, which basically covers fire safety warning labels. So we talked about the product labels. Now we're going to talk about the fire safety warning labels. And the second one we're going to discuss is F2417-09, and that covers how to properly test your candles for product safety. And this is another one I get a lot of questions about. When you're testing a candle, you're not just testing for performance, you're testing for safety. It's all about protecting your customers and your business, because following proper label requirements and ASTM standards ensures your candles have the right labels. It makes all the difference. It's not just about avoiding accidents, it's also about peace of mind for you and your customers. All right, and as I talked about earlier, thanks to products from our friends here at OnlineLabels.com, they now have pre-made candle warning labels by the roll. And they have a couple different sizes that they currently sell. One is your smaller size, and I believe they are 1.5 inches. And they have a larger size, which I believe is 2.5 inches, but if I missaid that, I will clarify it on the video. And you can also find them, of course, on the website. I will have links below in the video description to show you where to find these. If you're not already using online labels for your business or your labeling needs, well, now you have a reason to try them out. And if you are already using them, then this is an easy add-on. Like if you're already there buying labels, buy their candle warning labels as well. This really is an automatic add-on. Now, of course, I wouldn't mention or recommend them to you if I haven't tried them myself, but I have read them through. They are accurate. The recommended information that should be on these labels is here, as well as, of course, I've used them. So these larger ones, to get one here, are the 2.5 inches, right? Great quality. As always with all online labels, this would be perfect fit. And then the smaller one goes on a jar, something like this, right? So they have a couple different sizes depending. I think those two sizes are gonna fit the majority of the jar needs that you have. They're accurate, they're easy to use, they're affordable, they adhere well. You know, basically they just work. They're good labels, so check them out if you're interested. And thank you, Online Labels, not for just adding these to your product line, but also to sending some out for us to try and check them out firsthand. Back to ASTM, a little bit more about these standards. I want to address a question I get all the time. Are these standards mandatory? Well, you might find it surprising that all these standards are at this time currently voluntary. Now, there is a petition in place right now to make these standards mandatory, but at this time it is a voluntary basis. Now, when I say they're voluntary standards, let me provide a little bit more perspective here. It means that you have the right to choose whether or not to follow these standards. However, if one of your candles fails and causes property damage, injury, etc., lawyers will cite these standards as though they are mandatory, and that comes straight from the NCA, the National Candle Association. In other words, even though they are voluntary, they expect that candle makers follow these standards. It is best practice. It's essentially standard protocol, SOP for the industry. So do yourself a favor and do your best to try to adhere to these standards. My favorite way to do that is I basically make a test sheet that I follow and check everything off according to these standards. And then I will date those and I'll keep those as records. So if I ever do have an issue with a candle, even if it doesn't turn into a legal issue, I can double check and make sure I did what I was supposed to do. And if it does get to a legal issue, which hopefully never does, but if it does, you've got that in your back pocket. You can cite back, look, I agree with you. These are important standards, which is why as a business owner and someone who's passionate about the work I do, that I took the time to make sure I went through these standards and I checked all these boxes. And here's my testing records that show that I meet all of these standards. Here's the date and here's the proof that I validated my products. If you do not have a copy of the standards, you can actually get your own and you can purchase them for about $35, at least that's current pricing. And you can get them at www.astm.org. And that'll get you a copy of these standards that you can then use and turn into an actual template, testing template for yourself. Now let's dive into that first ASTM standard, F2058-07. This is the standard specification for candle fire safety labeling. Let me try that again. The standard specification, the standard specification for candle fire safety labeling. Yes, that's it. All right, the first part of the standard is that you need a warning statement in wording that it should be burned within sight, keep away from things that are flammable or burn, and keep away from children. Those are the first three requirements that have to be on a candle fire safety label. They do allow you the use of pictograms. Now, pictograms are those pictures that basically say the same thing as the words. And there are specific approved pictograms that can be used. And if you actually look closely on this warning label by Online Labels, those three pictograms are the specific ones that are currently approved by the ASTM. The first one is burn within sight, the next one's keep away from children, and then the third one is keep away from things that are flammable, like paper or curtains. Pictograms do not replace text. They have to be used in conjunction with text. It is good to have both because sometimes words are small, sometimes pictures are easier to understand. The combination of both is really, really important, but you just need to know that the pictograms cannot be used without text. Now, here's a curveball that I don't think a lot of people are aware of yet, and so I really want to highlight this. There is new placement requirements for candles with packaging. If your candle comes in a package, the warning label must be on the top or the side of the package. If it's not, if it's put on the bottom, The words "See bottom panel" for safety information must be present on the top or the side of the package. Almost no one knows that that is a new rule. So make sure that that is something you're doing. If you're using product packaging, make sure you're following that standard. And again, you can get a copy of these standards just to have for yourself. Labels must be visible to the customer at the point of sale, which again is why it's imperative that you have the right labeling information on the product packaging if it's not on the product itself. Whatever the customer sees when they purchase the candle, i.e. the candle itself or the box, that's where this information needs to be. Now, again, I'm not going to go through all the details. If you can get a copy of the standards yourself, you can look at specific exceptions or changes to some of these rules depending on the type of product you're making, but that summarizes the basic information. All right, now we're going to jump to standard F2417-09, and this is my favorite, the one I spend the most time on, and this is standard specification for fire safety for candles. In other words, the layman's term is this is the way you test to make sure your candles are safe to use. Now, there are several parts to this one, so we're just going to go kind of line by line here. The first one is your burn test parameters. How do you do it? First of all, the candle should be burned in 4-hour burn cycles until the end of the useful life. Now, I know instantly a lot of people are thinking, well, what about power burns? What about kind of variant burns? Because I even talk about that on my channel in some of my videos. Let me clarify that real quick. I always do a proper burn test like this is describing the one we're covering today. I also, in addition, will do another test where I do these variant time frames and I do power burns because I just want to know how my candles would act if someone doesn't treat them correctly. If someone is going to burn them all day, what does that look like with my product? That way, if a customer complains, I know how to help them out. If someone is only burning them for an hour or 2 hours at a time and it tunnels a little bit, then I can explain to a customer why that happens. So I do further testing to better understand my product and understand basically how to help with customer experience, right? But the 4-hour burn cycle through the life of the candle is the proper burn test for how you meet the standard. Wicks should be trimmed between every burn according to the label instructions, which is usually 1/4 inch, right? And that should be done between every burn cycle. Does this mean your customer is going to do that every time? No, but you are testing for proper burning performance and testing regulations. You should also be testing your products with minimal draft. You're going to get wildly different results if you test your candles in areas that are perfectly still or areas that have a lot of draft. You cannot take every circumstance or situation into account. You don't know how your customers are going to burn them. But again, you're trying to create a controlled environment to say that you meet these standards, that you pass the test. Or sorry, your products pass the test. I'm sure you're fine. You should also be trying to maintain a temperature during your burn cycles in your test environment between 68 degrees and 86 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, somewhere around room temperature or a little warmer. You want to avoid extreme conditions because that will drastically affect how a candle performs. So you want to keep a controlled environment. Another thing to consider is when you are testing several candles at the same time, you want to keep them about 8 inches apart. And that is because you don't want one candle's heat to affect the others. You don't want a draft going on. You just need to give them space to breathe, essentially. And then lastly, you want to be observing your flame heights at periodic intervals and then record each one at the end of each burn cycle. Those are the main burn test parameters. All right, so let's talk about, I just mentioned it, let's talk about the maximum flame height requirements. If you didn't know those exist, they do. You don't want your flame to be too high. For most candles, the rule is up to 3 inches. That is the base of the flame to the tip of the flame. You want to keep that 3 inches or less. Most of the time, you want less than that. It will depend on the size of the candle, the shape of the candle, the type of candle. There are reasons why the flame height can vary, but generally speaking, the rule is under 3 inches. I like to kind of try to keep it closer to 2 or so, but 3 inches and under is technically a pass. Another important factor is you do not want any secondary ignitions. In other words, if you extinguish that candle, it should not relight itself. Believe it or not, that happens. That happens because of too much carbon buildup or mushroom on the top. It can happen because the wick has fallen over and dipped and it's too close to the melt pool itself, and that wax and fragrance oil can reignite. Any debris in the candle can reignite the flame as well. So after you extinguish a candle, make sure it never reignites itself. That is a fail. It should also have 0 container failures. A container failure could be as large as a crack or a shatter. It could be as small as a hairline fracture on the glass. You just don't want any integrity of the container to be compromised. If it does, that's a fail. Generally speaking, if your flame height is correct, you've made the candle correctly, the jar never gets too hot, then these are not issues you're going to encounter. But that is why it's important to observe for these, because if you see any of these symptoms, It's a symptom of a larger problem. During this test, you also need to take into consideration stability of the container. Initially, candles should be able to fully support themselves even on a 10-degree tilt off level. If the candle is slightly tilted a little bit and it becomes very wobbly and unstable and going to fall over, that's an issue with the container. That's an issue with the jar. So try to not go with jars that are so crazy and so unique that they're just little wobble wheels, right? Make sure they are stable containers. Now, most of these tilt stability rules apply to freestanding candles, but it goes without saying that even a candle like in a jar should not just fall over on its own while it's burning. I think that's pretty much common sense. There are other parts of this standard that we're not going to review in this video. They apply to gel candles, tea lights, and a few other different variations of candles. I'm not going to go into the details of every one of those in this video. If you all do need some more information on those, I would encourage you to, well, you can let me know in the comments if that does interest you. Otherwise, you can reach out to the NCA, the candles.org website. You can go to the ASTM website, and you can review this information in more detail if you want. But honestly, if any of you have questions about anything that we've covered so far, just let me know in the comments. I'll try to provide some further clarification if I need to do a follow-up video. These are things that we can talk about and share as a community. I would encourage all of you to share this video in other Facebook groups and on your own socials, just to make sure that we're all creating safe candles, safe products for all consumers. Because one bad candle affects all of us. And so we want to keep this a safe hobby, a safe business. We want to keep this a safe product for people to continue to enjoy. Today, we've talked about the candle product labeling requirements. We've talked about candle fire safety warning label requirements and reviewed how to properly test for safety when you do a burn test. I really hope that's been helpful and valuable information. I want to hear from you. Have you encountered any labeling challenges yourself or confusion on any of these topics in the past? Hopefully, I've cleared some of that up. Maybe you have your own candle safety tip to share. But to wrap up, just keep in mind that adhering to these ASTM standards and ensuring that your candles are properly labeled isn't just about compliance. It's about caring for your customers, caring for your own business, caring about the entire industry. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out Online Labels for their candle warning labels already made for you. With that being said, I'll see you all next time. Thanks.